Red wine splashed across my daughter's white dress at Thanksgiving dinner. For 4 years, I watched my son-in-law, Derek Mitchell, treat our family like his personal kingdom. He controlled the guest list, the conversation, even which grocery store my daughter could use. But throwing wine at Victoria because she defended me, that crossed a line he couldn't uncross. What Derek didn't know was that the broke old contractor he was humiliating owned half the commercial real estate in our downtown district. My name is Mortimer Hayes, and I'm 72 years old. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you are watching from. This is the story of how underestimating the wrong person cost my son-in-law everything he thought wanted. By the time that wine stain dried, Derek had lost more money than most people see in a lifetime. And it all started because he made one fatal assumption about a quiet old man who'd spent 40 years building an empire in silence. Let me back up 6 months to show you how Derek systematically turned my own family against me. It started with small comments. Dad's getting forgetful. Maybe we should handle his finances. That old truck is embarrassing. Derek earned $95,000 a year in marketing. I drove a 1987 Ford F-150 with rust spots and shopped with coupons at Walmart. To him, this meant I was poor. Mortimer, Derek said during a family barbecue in June, we need to talk about your living situation. I'm fine where I am, I replied. A 2-bedroom apartment at your age? It's not practical. My daughter Victoria nodded along. Derek's right, Dad. Sunny Meadows has wonderful facilities. Sunny Meadows. The nursing home cost $8,400 a month. I can take care of myself, I said quietly. Derek laughed. With what money? Your Social Security barely covers rent. He was wrong, but I didn't correct him. By August, Derek was showing me brochures. Glossy photos of elderly people playing checkers and eating pudding cups. Think of it as assisted living, Victoria said. You'd have friends. I have friends, I said. Where? Derek smirked. At the hardware store? Actually, yes, but also at the bank, the city planning office, and 3 different law firms. September brought the power of attorney discussion. It's just paperwork, Dad, Victoria explained over dinner, in case something happens. Derek leaned back in his chair. Frankly, Mortimer, you should be grateful. Do you know how much time this takes? Managing someone else's limited assets? Limited assets. I almost smiled. My son Benjamin, fresh out of business school, jumped in. Dad, you have to think practically. What happens if you get sick? Medical bills? We need to plan. I have insurance, I said. Basic coverage, Derek corrected. Nothing comprehensive. Look, I manage Victoria's finances now. I can handle yours too. Victoria used to handle her own money just fine before Derek. Now she asked permission to buy coffee. October was worse. Derek started talking openly about my finances in front of others. Poor Mortimer, he told his golf buddies at a family gathering. Living paycheck to paycheck at 72. If we don't step in soon, he'll be on the street. I was standing right there. His friend Mark nodded sympathetically. Tough situation, Derek, but good on you for taking responsibility. Someone has to, Derek sighed dramatically. These old-timers, they just don't understand modern financial planning. I built my first duplex in 1979. By 1985, I owned 6 rental properties. But Derek saw the pickup truck and drew his conclusions. November arrived with more pressure. Dad, Victoria said during our weekly call, Derek found a place that takes Medicare. I don't need Medicare housing. You can't afford private care. Be realistic. Realistic. I almost told her about the $3.2 million in my Merrill Lynch account. Almost. But Derek wasn't finished. He had one more card to play. Mortimer, he said 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, we're concerned about your mental state. Excuse me? The isolation, the stubborn behavior, early dementia signs. Victoria looked uncomfortable but stayed quiet. Maybe you should see someone, Derek continued. A professional evaluation. That was when I realized Derek wasn't just trying to control my money. He was building a case to declare me incompetent. The man thought he was playing chess with a checker player. He had no idea I'd been watching him for 4 years, documenting every manipulation, every financial control tactic, every attempt to isolate Victoria from her family. What Derek didn't know was that I'd already spoken to my attorney about him. Twice. By mid-November, I understood exactly what I was about to lose if I stayed silent. Derek's master plan crystallized during a family meeting he called at his house. Victoria, Benjamin, and I sat around his glass dining table while Derek presented his solution. "I've done the math," Derek announced, pulling out a manila folder. Mortimer's monthly expenses versus income. He'd calculated everything wrong, but his confidence was absolute. Social Security, $1,400 monthly. Apartment rent, $1,850. That's negative $450 before food, utilities, or medical. Victoria frowned. "Dad, is that right?" I could have explained that I owned the building my apartment was in, that my monthly rent was actually property tax on a $4.7 million asset. But Derek was still talking. "The solution is simple," Derek continued. "Power of attorney transfer, immediate asset liquidation, and Sunny Meadows placement by January 1st. Asset liquidation. He wanted to sell my truck, my furniture, whatever he thought I owned. "What about Dad's construction company money?" Benjamin asked. Derek waved dismissively. "Hayes & Sons went under in 2019. Mortimer lost everything." Wrong again. I'd sold Hayes & Sons Construction for $4.7 million when I retired, but Derek had never bothered to ask about the details. "The nursing home will handle medical care," Derek explained. "I'll manage the financial transition. Victoria gets power of attorney for continuity." Victoria shifted uncomfortably. "Derek, maybe we should..." "Should what?" Derek's voice sharpened. "Enable his delusions? Mortimer, you can't take care of yourself anymore." "I take care of myself fine," I said quietly. Derek laughed. "You clip coupons to buy generic cereal. Your truck is older than my marriage. When's the last time you went to a doctor?" 2 weeks ago, I said. "Full physical. Perfect health." Derek's expression darkened. "At some clinic? With what insurance?" "Private physician. Dr. Patricia Morrison. Concierge practice." That stopped him for a moment. "Concierge medicine costs $20,000 annually. How are you paying for that?" Derek demanded. "I manage," I said. "With what money, Mortimer? Stop being cryptic. We're trying to help you." Help. Derek's version of help meant total control. Benjamin looked between us nervously. "Dad, maybe you could just..." "Show us? Your bank statements, so we know the real situation?" Smart question. Benjamin had always been sharper than Derek gave him credit for. Derek nodded approvingly. "Transparency is important. Mortimer, bring your financial documents to Thanksgiving dinner. We'll review everything together." "That's private," I said. "Not anymore," Derek replied coolly. "Not if you want to stay in this family." The threat was finally explicit. Submit to financial control or lose access to my children. Victoria looked stricken. "Derek, that's not..." "Not what? Fair? Life isn't fair, Victoria. Your father is becoming a burden we can't afford." Burden. There was Derek's true opinion. "What if I refuse?" I asked. Derek's smile was thin. "Then you're on your own. No family dinners, no grandchildren visits when Benjamin settles down, no emergency contacts. Complete independence, just like you wanted." The stakes were clear now. Derek was betting I'd choose family access over personal autonomy, that I'd trade my freedom for their conditional love. What Derek didn't understand was that real family doesn't require surrender. But there was something else at stake, something Derek couldn't see. Victoria's independence. Over 4 years, I'd watched Derek systematically isolate my daughter. First, he moved her bank accounts to his control. Then he managed her career decisions. Now he monitored her spending, her friendships, even her phone calls. Derek was using me as practice for total family domination. If I submitted, Victoria would never escape. She'd become another asset in Derek's portfolio, managed and manipulated until she forgot she'd ever been autonomous. Benjamin was already showing signs. Despite his MBA, he deferred to Derek on every financial question. Derek had convinced my son that business school theory mattered more than 40 years of real-world experience. So the real stakes weren't just my freedom, they were my family's future. Derek was betting that a broke old contractor couldn't fight back effectively. That shame would keep me quiet about my true situation. He was about to learn that humiliating the wrong millionaire is an expensive mistake. But first, I had to let him make it publicly. Thanksgiving dinner would give Derek the audience he wanted for my humiliation. It would also give me the witnesses I needed for his destruction. Thanksgiving Day arrived gray and cold. I drove my rust-spotted F-150 to Derek's suburban house, watching him wince as I parked next to his leased BMW. "Right on time, Mortimer," Derek said, opening the door. "Did you bring those financial documents?" "I brought what's necessary," I replied. Inside, the house smelled like turkey and tension. Victoria hugged me quickly, whispering, "Dad, please, just cooperate. Derek's trying to help." Benjamin shook my hand formally. "Hi, Dad. Ready for the big conversation?" Derek had coached them well. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Derek carved the turkey with theatrical precision, playing the generous host. But I could see him calculating the perfect moment to strike. It came during dessert. "Mortimer," Derek announced, setting down his wine glass, "we need to address the elephant in the room." "Which elephant is that?" I asked calmly. "Your financial situation. Show everyone what you brought." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a single folded paper, my latest bank statement from First National. Derek's eyes lit up. Finally, some transparency. I unfolded the statement slowly. The checking account balance was clearly visible, $847,129. Derek grabbed the paper before anyone else could see it. His face went white, then red, then white again. This can't be right," he stammered. "What does it say?" Victoria asked. Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "It says, there's an error. Has to be." "What kind of error?" Benjamin leaned forward. Derek was scrambling now. "Banks make mistakes, especially with elderly customers. Someone probably deposited money in the wrong account." "Whose money would that be?" I asked quietly. "I don't know, but you can't have $800,000. You drive a truck from the 80s. "Why can't I drive an old truck?" I asked. Derek's voice rose. "Because people with money don't drive garbage." The room went silent. Victoria's fork clinked against her plate. "Excuse me?" I said. Derek realized he'd overplayed his hand, but his arrogance wouldn't let him back down. "I mean, look at yourself, Mortimer. Your clothes, your car, your apartment. Nothing adds up." "What should add up?" I asked. "Rich people look rich. They live rich. You live like a what, Derek?" "Like a poor person." Benjamin winced. Victoria looked mortified. Derek continued his meltdown. "This bank statement is obviously fake, or stolen, or some kind of Social Security mix-up." "Call the bank," I suggested. "Verify it." "I will." Derek pulled out his phone. "First National Bank, right? I'll call them right now." "They're closed," Victoria said quietly. "It's Thanksgiving." Derek's face flushed deeper. "Fine, tomorrow. But I know this is fraudulent." "Why?" I asked. "Because I've seen your life, Mortimer. Your pathetic apartment, your ancient truck, your generic groceries. You're broke." "Derek," Victoria said sharply, "that's enough." "No!" Derek slammed his hand on the table. "I've spent months planning how to help this family. I've researched nursing homes. I've calculated expenses. I've prepared legal documents." "Nobody asked you to," Benjamin said quietly. Derek whirled on him. "Someone had to. You're too young to understand. Victoria's too emotional. I'm the only one thinking practically." "Practically about what?" I asked. "About supporting a delusional old man who thinks he's wealthy." The room felt like a vacuum. Even Derek seemed to realize he'd gone too far. Victoria set her napkin down carefully. "Derek, apologize to my father." "For what?" "For telling the truth." "For being cruel," she said. Derek's laugh was bitter. "Cruel? I'm the only one brave enough to face reality. Your father is broke, aging, and becoming our financial responsibility. This fake bank statement doesn't change that." "It's not fake," I said. "Prove it," Derek challenged. "How?" "Show us your investment accounts, your property deeds, your tax returns. If you're really wealthy, you'll have documentation." Derek thought he was calling my bluff. "You want proof?" I asked. "I demand proof." I reached for my phone. Derek smirked, thinking I was stalling. I dialed a number I'd memorized years ago. Margaret Sullivan's office, answered a familiar voice. Margaret, it's Mortimer Hayes. I need you to come to a Thanksgiving dinner. Bring the portfolio. Derek's smirk faded. Everything? Margaret asked. Everything. How quickly can you get to Oakwood Drive? 20 minutes. I hung up. Derek stared at me. Who was that? My attorney. Your attorney? Derek laughed nervously. Mortimer, estate attorneys don't make house calls on Thanksgiving. Mine does. Why? I looked Derek straight in the eye. Because she's been waiting 4 years for this phone call. While we waited for Margaret, Derek tried to regain control of the narrative. Look, Mortimer, I appreciate the theater, but calling some lawyer friend doesn't prove anything. Friend? I asked. Whatever she is. The point is, my phone rang. I glanced at the display. Pinnacle Property Management. Derek's eyes narrowed as I answered. Hayes here. Mr. Hayes, sorry to bother you on Thanksgiving. We've got a heating issue at the Riverside complex. Tenant in 4B says no heat since yesterday. Derek leaned forward, trying to listen. Call Morrison Heating, I said. They're on our contractor list. Bill the property account. Will do. Also, the November rent deposits cleared. $3.2 million total. Should I transfer to your Merrill Lynch, as usual? Derek's face went pale. Yes, standard transfer. Anything else? That's it. Happy Thanksgiving, Mr. Hayes. I hung up. The room was dead silent. Derek's mouth worked soundlessly for several seconds before he managed, What? What was that? Rent collection, I said simply. Rent collection? Derek's voice cracked. From what? Properties. What properties? The ones I own. Victoria stared at me. Dad, you own rental properties. A few. Benjamin found his voice first. How many is a few? 34 commercial buildings. Downtown district mostly. Derek gripped the table edge. That's impossible. Why? Because I'm what, Derek? Derek's worldview was crumbling in real time. Everything he'd assumed, every calculation he'd made, every humiliation he'd planned was based on completely false information. You said you were retired, he whispered. I am. From construction. Yes. But you live like what? Derek couldn't finish the sentence. He was starting to understand that appearances and reality might not match. Victoria was doing her own calculations. Dad, if you collect $3 million in rent every month, 3.2, I corrected, then you make annually, well, about $38 million gross. Net is lower after expenses, taxes, property management. Derek made a choking sound. Why didn't you tell us? Victoria asked. Why would I? Because we've been worried about your finances. You've been worried. I've been fine. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, stunned. Dad, we thought you needed help. I know, but you let us think you were broke. I never said I was broke. You assumed. Derek was hyperventilating. This doesn't make sense. Rich people don't live in apartments. They don't drive old trucks. They don't clip coupons. Why not? Because they don't have to. Maybe I like my truck. Maybe I like saving money. Maybe I don't need to prove anything to anyone. Derek's phone buzzed. He glanced at it automatically, then did a double take. What is it? Victoria asked. Derek held up his phone with a shaking hand. Google alert. Mortimer Hayes Construction. There's a news article from 2019. He read aloud, his voice getting smaller with each word. Local construction magnate Mortimer Hayes sells 40-year empire to national firm for undisclosed sum. Hayes & Sons Construction, responsible for 60% of downtown commercial development, will continue operations under new management. Hayes, 69, plans to focus on his extensive real estate portfolio. Derek looked up at me with something approaching terror. Undisclosed sum, he whispered. How much? 4.7 million, I said quietly. Plus the real estate portfolio, Derek continued reading. Estimated value. He couldn't finish. 15.8 million, I completed for him. The doorbell rang. Derek jumped like he'd been electrocuted. That'll be Margaret, I said, standing up. Don't, Derek said desperately. Please don't. Don't what? Don't whatever you're planning. I looked down at him calmly. Derek, 30 minutes ago, you demanded proof. You said I was delusional. You called my bank statement fake. I was wrong. Yes, you were. The doorbell rang again. But that doesn't mean we can't work this out, Derek said frantically. Family is family, right? We can forget this whole conversation. I walked toward the front door. Mortimer, please! I turned back to look at Derek one more time. His arrogance was completely gone, replaced by naked fear. He was starting to realize that the broke old man he'd been tormenting for months was actually the wealthiest person he'd ever met, and that he'd just spent Thanksgiving dinner systematically insulting him. I opened the door to find Margaret Sullivan standing on Derek's porch, briefcase in hand, looking like she'd driven straight from her own family dinner. Margaret, I said, thank you for coming. Wouldn't miss it, Mortimer. Is this the son-in-law? Derek had followed me to the foyer, Victoria and Benjamin close behind. Derek's face was the color of old concrete. Derek Mitchell, he said weakly, extending his hand. Margaret looked at his hand, but didn't take it. Ms. Sullivan, Hayes Estate Planning. I've heard quite a lot about you, Mr. Mitchell. Good things, I hope, Derek tried to joke. No, Margaret said flatly. We returned to the dining room, where Margaret efficiently cleared a space at the table and opened her briefcase. Derek hovered nearby, like a man watching his execution preparations. Mortimer tells me you've been questioning his financial status, Margaret said, pulling out thick folders. There was some confusion, Derek stammered. About what, specifically? Derek glanced desperately at Victoria, who was staring at the folders with growing amazement. Well, he lives very modestly, Derek said. And I assumed that meant he was struggling financially. Margaret's laugh was sharp. You assumed that a man who owns $15.8 million in assets was struggling because he drives an old truck? I didn't know about the assets, Derek said weakly. Did you ask? Well, no. Did you research public property records? No. Did you inquire about his business sale? I didn't know there was a business sale. Margaret looked at Derek like he was something she'd found on her shoe. So you made financial plans for a man whose finances you never investigated. Derek's silence was answer enough. Let me show you what your father-in-law actually owns, Margaret said, spreading documents across Derek's dining table. The first document was a Merrill Lynch portfolio statement. Victoria gasped when she saw the numbers. $3.2 million in liquid investments, Margaret announced. Conservative mix, bonds, dividend stocks, treasury bills. Derek made a whimpering sound. Next, First National Bank statements. Checking account balance as of yesterday, $847,329. Benjamin whistled softly. Margaret continued methodically. Savings account, $215,000. Business account for property management, $1.6 million. Derek gripped the back of a chair for support. Now, real estate holdings, Margaret said, unfolding a legal-sized document. 34 commercial properties in the downtown district. Current assessed value, $11.3 million. Victoria was doing math in her head. That's over $15 million total. $15.8 million net worth, correct, Margaret confirmed, which makes your father one of the wealthiest individuals in the county. Derek's legs gave out. He collapsed into his chair. There's more, Margaret continued. Annual rental income, $38.4 million gross. Net income after expenses and taxes, approximately $26 million. The room was so quiet I could hear Derek's labored breathing. So when you suggested Sunny Meadows Nursing Home, Margaret said, consulting her notes, you were recommending that a millionaire with an income of $26 million annually move into a facility that costs $8,400 per month. I didn't know, Derek whispered, and when you offered to manage his limited assets, you were volunteering to handle a portfolio worth more than you'll earn in your entire career. Derek's head dropped into his hands, but Margaret wasn't finished. Mr. Mitchell, I understand you've also discussed power of attorney arrangements? Derek nodded without looking up. Did you know that attempting to gain control of an elderly person's finances through deception constitutes elder financial abuse under state law? Derek's head snapped up. I was trying to help by convincing his family he was incompetent? That's not what I was doing. Margaret pulled out another folder. I have documentation of your statements over the past 6 months. Quotes about his mental state. Claims about his financial incapacity. Discussions about forced institutionalization. Victoria looked horrified. Derek, you were documenting Dad's mental state? For his own good? Derek protested. Without his knowledge? Margaret asked. I was protecting the family. From what? Derek's voice rose again, desperation making him reckless. From supporting a broke old man. But he's not broke, Margaret said quietly. He's a millionaire. I didn't know that. Because you never asked. The truth hit Derek like a physical blow. He'd spent months building a case for my incompetence, convinced he was saving his family from financial ruin. Instead, he'd been systematically insulting one of the wealthiest men in the county. This is insane, Derek said finally. Why does he live like he's poor? He doesn't live like he's poor, Margaret corrected. He lives like he's comfortable. There's a difference. Derek looked around wildly. But the truck, the apartment, the coupons. Mr. Hayes likes his truck. His apartment is in a building he owns, and saving money is how people stay wealthy. Victoria was studying her father with new eyes. Dad, why didn't you tell us? Would it have changed anything? I asked. Victoria considered this. Derek might have treated you differently. Exactly, I said. I wanted to know how Derek really felt about family. Now I do. Derek's face crumpled. He finally understood the trap he'd built for himself. Every insult, every dismissive comment, every attempt to control my life had been based on the assumption that I was powerless to fight back. But I wasn't powerless. I was patient. Mr. Mitchell, Margaret said, I believe you have something to say to my client. Derek looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Mortimer, I'm sorry. I made a terrible mistake. What mistake was that? I asked. I thought you were poor. No, I said quietly. Your mistake was thinking that gave you the right to humiliate me. Derek opened his mouth to respond, but that's when he made his final error. Instead of accepting responsibility, instead of showing genuine remorse, Derek's wounded pride took control. This is ridiculous, he shouted, standing up abruptly. You've been lying to us for months. You let us worry about you. You let us think you needed help. Derek, Victoria said sharply, stop. No, I'm tired of being made to feel guilty. He deceived us. He's sitting on millions while we stress about his care. Derek's face was red with rage and embarrassment. You know what this is? Derek continued. This is manipulation. You're a manipulative old man who gets off on making people feel sorry for you. The room went dead silent. Derek wasn't finished. Well, I'm done feeling sorry for you. You want to play games? Fine, but don't expect me to pretend this is normal. Derek grabbed his wine glass and took a large gulp. You're sick, Mortimer. Sick and manipulative and... That's when Derek threw the wine. Red Cabernet Sauvignon splashed across Victoria's white dress, staining the fabric and splattering onto the table. Victoria gasped, staring down at her ruined dress. Derek immediately realized what he'd done, but it was too late. He'd just assaulted my daughter in front of witnesses, in front of my attorney. I stood up slowly, my calm finally cracking. Derek, I said quietly, you just made your last mistake. The wine stain spread across Victoria's dress like spilled blood. She sat frozen, staring down at herself in shock. Derek's wine glass hit the floor and shattered. Victoria, I'm sorry, I didn't mean... You threw wine at my daughter, I said, my voice deadly calm. It was an accident. In front of my attorney. Derek looked at Margaret, who was already taking notes. I was upset, Derek stammered. I lost my temper, but I would never intentionally... You intentionally threw wine, Margaret said, without looking up from her legal pad. Not at Victoria. At the table. She was in the way. Victoria finally found her voice. I was in the way? Derek's panic made him say exactly the wrong thing. You know what I meant. I was angry at your father, not you. So you threw wine, I said. I was frustrated. This whole situation is insane. He's been lying to us for months. I looked at Derek with something approaching pity. Derek, I never lied about anything. You let us think you were poor. You assumed I was poor. I never confirmed it. That's the same thing. Is it? Margaret cleared her throat. Mr. Mitchell, do you understand what just happened here? Derek looked at her desperately. I threw wine. I'll pay for the dress. I'll apologize properly, whatever it takes. You assaulted Mr. Hayes's daughter, Margaret said carefully, in front of multiple witnesses, while attempting to gain control of his finances through fraudulent means. Derek's face went white. Fraudulent means? Elder abuse, Derek, I said quietly. That's what it's called when you try to convince someone's family they're incompetent in order to take control of their assets. But I thought you were broke. That's not a defense, Margaret said. Intent matters. You intended to control an elderly person's finances without their consent. Derek looked wildly around the room. Victoria was dabbing at her dress with her napkin, tears in her eyes. Benjamin sat in stunned silence. This is crazy, Derek said. I was trying to help the family. Help them how? Margaret asked. By taking responsibility for a financial burden. What burden? Derek's mouth opened and closed. He was still thinking in terms of supporting a poor relative, even with the evidence of my wealth spread across his dining table. The caregiving costs? The medical expenses? Mr. Hayes' annual income is $26 million, Margaret said patiently. How is he a financial burden? Derek couldn't answer because there was no answer. His entire worldview had collapsed, but his brain hadn't caught up yet. Margaret, I said quietly, show him the rest. Margaret smiled grimly and pulled out another folder. Mr. Mitchell, you mentioned wanting to see property deeds. She spread out document after document. Each one represented another building I owned. The office complex where you work, Margaret announced, consulting a deed. Hayes Property Holdings, LLC. Derek's face went from white to gray. The shopping center where your gym is located, Hayes Property Holdings. Derek gripped the table edge. The apartment complex where you lived before buying this house, Hayes Property Holdings. Victoria stared at her father. Dad, do you own Derek's office building? Among others, I said quietly. Margaret continued relentlessly. 34 commercial properties in total. Your husband has been paying rent to your father for 6 years without knowing it. Derek made a sound like air leaving a balloon. There's more, Margaret said, pulling out another document. Mr. Hayes, would you like to tell them about Sunny Meadows? Derek's eyes widened in horror. I bought it last month, I said quietly. You bought the nursing home? Victoria asked. When Derek started pushing so hard for me to move there, I got curious about their finances. Turns out they were struggling. I made an offer. Derek was hyperventilating. So when you suggested I move to Sunny Meadows, I continued, you were suggesting I move into a facility I own. Benjamin started laughing, not happy laughter, shocked, disbelieving laughter. This is unreal, he said. Derek, you've been trying to put Dad in his own nursing home. Derek clutched his chest like he was having a heart attack. But wait, I said, looking at Margaret. There's one more thing Derek should know. Margaret nodded and pulled out a final document. Mitchell and Associates Marketing, she read. Derek's employer. Derek looked confused. What about it? They rent space in the Riverside office complex, Margaret explained. So? The Riverside complex is owned by Hayes Property Holdings, Margaret said. Your employer pays rent to your father-in-law. Derek's world collapsed completely. But that means... Derek's voice was barely a whisper. That means, I said gently, that you work for me, Derek. Indirectly, but you work for me. Derek slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. And when you threw wine at my daughter, I continued, you assaulted the daughter of your landlord. Derek understood now. Finally, completely, he understood. The broke old man he'd been tormenting for months was actually his economic superior in every measurable way. Derek earned $95,000 annually. I earned $26 million. Derek leased his BMW for $847 monthly. I owned 34 buildings. Derek had been offering to manage my limited assets while paying me rent from 3 different sources. Mr. Mitchell, Margaret said formally, my client would like to discuss some changes. Derek looked up hopefully. Maybe he thought I was going to forgive him. Changes? He asked. To his estate planning, Margaret clarified. Derek's hope died. You see, Margaret continued, recent events have made Mr. Hayes reconsider his legacy plans. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folded document. "Derek," I said quietly, "you wanted to see my will. Here it is." I handed him the document. Derek's hands shook as he unfolded it. His eyes scanned the pages, looking for his name, looking for Victoria's name, looking for Benjamin's name. "I don't understand," Derek said finally. "It's simple," I replied. "Everything goes to charity." Derek stared at me. "Everything?" $15.8 million, the Wounded Warrior Project, the American Cancer Society, the local food bank. "But your children—" "My children participated in planning my incompetency hearing," I said calmly. "They agreed I was unfit to manage my own affairs." Victoria looked stricken. "Dad, we didn't know—" "You didn't ask," I said simply. Derek was reading frantically now, looking for any mention of family inheritance. He found nothing. "This can't be legal," Derek said desperately. "It's completely legal," Margaret confirmed. "Sound mind, witnessed signature, notarized document." Derek looked at Victoria, then at Benjamin, then back at me. "You're disinheriting your own children because of a mistake?" "I'm disinheriting people who tried to have me declared incompetent," I corrected. "But Mortimer, they're your family." I looked at Derek steadily. "So are you, Derek. How did that work out?" Derek stared at the will, like it might change if he looked hard enough. "Mortimer, please," he said. "This is insane. You can't disinherit your children over a misunderstanding." "Watch me," I said quietly. Derek turned to Victoria desperately. Tell him you didn't mean it. You didn't really want him declared incompetent." Victoria looked at her stained dress, then at me. "Dad, I thought Derek was trying to help." "By taking control of my finances? By protecting you from what?" Victoria couldn't finish the sentence. She was starting to understand that there had never been anything to protect me from. Derek grabbed Benjamin's arm. "You have an MBA. Explain to him that this is emotional decision-making, that families work through problems." Benjamin pulled away. "Derek, you threw wine at my sister." "It was an accident." "You called our father delusional," Benjamin continued. "You said he was a burden. You tried to have him institutionalized." "I was trying to help. You were trying to control," I said. "There's a difference." Margaret was still taking notes. "Mr. Mitchell, for the record, are you admitting to attempting financial control over Mr. Hayes?" Derek realized the legal implications too late. No, I was just what?" Derek's mouth worked silently. Any answer would incriminate him further. "Margaret," I said, "execute the changes." Margaret opened her briefcase and pulled out fresh documents. "These are the finalized estate planning adjustments," she announced. "Complete charitable distribution upon Mr. Hayes' death." Derek watched in horror as Margaret spread out the new papers. "Effective immediately?" Margaret asked. "Effective immediately," I confirmed. Derek lunged toward the table. "Wait! You can't sign that!" I picked up Margaret's pen. "Mortimer, don't do this," Derek pleaded. "Think about Victoria. Think about Benjamin. They're your children." I paused with the pen over the signature line. Derek thought he'd reached me. "Yes," he said desperately. "Think about your family. Think about your legacy. You can't let one bad evening destroy decades of love." I looked at Derek calmly. "You're right about one thing." Derek's face lit up with hope. "I shouldn't let one bad evening destroy my legacy," I continued. "But Derek, this wasn't one bad evening." Derek's hope died. "This was 6 months of systematic disrespect," I said, signing the first page. 6 months of you convincing my children I was incompetent." I signed the second page. 6 months of you planning to control my assets while calling me a burden." Third page signed. "And tonight, you threw wine at my daughter because you were embarrassed about being wrong." Final signature completed. Derek collapsed into his chair, watching $15.8 million disappear forever. Margaret collected the signed documents. "Mr. Hayes, is there anything else?" "Yes," I said. "Derek's lease situation." Derek looked up sharply. "What about it?" "You rent from 3 of my properties," I said. "Your office building, your gym, that storage unit you think I don't know about." Derek's face went pale again. What storage unit? Victoria asked Ed. Derek didn't answer. Margaret consulted her notes. Unit 47B at Secure Storage Solutions, Hayes Property Holdings, rental agreement in Derek Mitchell's name. What do you store there, Derek? I asked mildly. Derek's silence was telling. Margaret, what did our property manager report about Unit 47B? Margaret smiled grimly. Possible commercial inventory, stored electronics, items that might represent unreported income. Victoria stared at her husband. Derek, what electronics? Derek was trapped. He'd been using my storage unit to hide assets from his own wife. Nothing important, he mumbled. Important enough to pay $200 monthly for storage, I said. How do you know what I pay? Derek demanded. Because I own the building, Derek. I see all the rental agreements. Derek realized he'd been caught, not just in the family manipulation, but in financial deception. Margaret, I continued, what's the standard procedure for lease violations? Immediate termination if the tenant has committed fraud or assault, Margaret replied. Has Derek committed assault? Margaret looked at Victoria's stained dress. In my professional opinion, yes. And fraud? Attempting to gain control of an elderly person's finances through deception constitutes fraudulent behavior. I looked at Derek steadily. Derek, you're evicted. All 3 properties. 30 days notice. Derek shot to his feet. You can't evict me from my office. I can evict you from my building. But my job is in my building. Derek was spiraling. This is revenge. This is vindictive. This is consequences, I corrected. Victoria was doing her own calculations. Derek, if you lose your office lease, don't you lose your job? Derek didn't answer. And if you lose your job, Victoria continued, how do we pay the mortgage? Derek still didn't answer. Derek, Victoria said quietly, how do we pay for anything? Derek looked at her with panic in his eyes. We'll figure it out. This is temporary. He'll calm down. Family is family. Victoria looked at her father. Dad, is this temporary? I stood up, putting on my jacket. Derek learned tonight that actions have consequences, I said. Sometimes those consequences are permanent. Margaret packed her briefcase efficiently. Mr. Hayes, I'll file these documents first thing Monday morning. Thank you, Margaret. Derek made one last desperate attempt. Mortimer, what do you want? Money? Apologies? What will fix this? I looked at Derek one final time. Derek, for 6 months, you treated me like garbage because you thought I couldn't fight back. Tonight you threw wine at my daughter because you thought I was powerless. I paused at the door. You were wrong about my power, but you were right about one thing. What? I am too old to waste time on people who don't respect me. I walked out of Derek's house for the last time. Behind me I could hear Derek begging Victoria to call me back, but Victoria didn't call. She was too busy processing the fact that her husband had just destroyed their family's relationship with a millionaire, and their financial future along with it. The consequences unfolded exactly as I'd expected. Derek's eviction notices arrived by certified mail on Monday morning. His office lease, his gym membership, his storage unit, all terminated for breach of contract. By Wednesday, Derek had lost his job. Mitchell and Associates Marketing couldn't afford to relocate their offices, so they terminated Derek's employment instead. By Friday, Derek was frantically calling real estate agents, trying to find office space he could actually afford. There wasn't any. Commercial real estate in our downtown area was expensive, and most of it was controlled by 3 major property management companies. I owned 2 of those companies. The third company was managed by my former business partner, who still owed me several favors. Derek discovered that he'd been effectively blacklisted from every professional building in the city. Victoria filed for separation on the following Monday. She called me that evening. Dad, she said quietly, Derek's been lying about more than just your finances. The storage unit? Among other things. I found out he's been hiding income for 2 years, and there are credit cards I didn't know about. How much debt? $89,000, plus the mortgage. Victoria's voice was shaky. Dad, I'm in trouble. Derek controlled all our finances. I don't even know what we actually own. Do you want help figuring it out? Could you help me? Of course. It took Margaret 3 days to untangle Derek and Victoria's finances. The picture was ugly. Derek had been systematically hiding assets while building debt. He'd opened credit accounts in Victoria's name without her knowledge. He'd been skimming from joint accounts to fund his storage unit business. Apparently, Derek had been reselling electronics online and hiding the income. Victoria was liable for debt she didn't know existed, while Derek had been building a secret nest egg. This is fraud, Margaret told Victoria. Clear financial abuse. What are my options? Divorce, immediately, before Derek can hide any more assets. Victoria looked at me. Dad, I'm so sorry. I should have listened to you about Derek. You couldn't have known he was hiding this much. But I should have questioned why he was so interested in your finances. Yes, I said simply. You should have. You should have. Benjamin called me that same week. Dad, I owe you an apology. For what specifically? For assuming Derek knew what he was talking about. For not asking you directly about your situation. Benjamin paused. Dad, I have an MBA in finance. I should have researched Derek's claims instead of just accepting them. Yes, you should have. I let my business school training make me arrogant. I thought I understood finances better than someone from your generation. And now? Now I realize you built a $15 million empire while I was learning theory in classrooms. Benjamin was quiet for a moment. Dad, would you consider mentoring me in real estate investment? I want to learn how business actually works. Are you asking for money or knowledge? Knowledge. I want to earn everything myself, but I'd like to learn from someone who actually succeeded. I considered this. Benjamin had apologized specifically, acknowledged his mistakes, and was asking for guidance rather than handouts. We can discuss it, I said. Derek, meanwhile, was spiraling. Unable to find office space, he'd started working from home. But without his job income, the mortgage payments became impossible. Victoria had filed for divorce and frozen their joint accounts pending asset discovery. Derek tried to liquidate his secret electronics inventory, but Margaret had already flagged it as hidden marital assets. Derek's BMW was repossessed in the 3rd week. His house went into foreclosure proceedings in the 5th week. By month 6, Derek was living in a studio apartment across town, working freelance marketing gigs and driving a 15-year-old Honda Civic. His income had dropped from $95,000 annually to maybe $30,000, and most of that went to child support for the daughter he'd thrown wine at. Derek tried to reach out to me exactly once. He called my number and left a voicemail. Mortimer, this is Derek. I know you're angry, but this has gone too far. Victoria and I are getting divorced. I lost my job. I'm losing my house. This punishment doesn't fit the crime. I didn't return his call. Derek left a second message a week later. Mortimer, I'm begging you. I made mistakes. I admit that. But I have nothing left. I can't even afford a lawyer for the divorce proceedings. Please, for Victoria's sake, can we work something out? I deleted the message without listening to the end. Derek's third and final message came 2 months later. Mortimer, you won. Okay? You completely destroyed my life. I hope that makes you feel better. I hope $15 million in charity donations make up for ruining your daughter's marriage. That message I saved, not because it made me feel better, but because it perfectly captured Derek's fundamental misunderstanding. I hadn't destroyed his life. Derek had destroyed his own life by systematically disrespecting someone he assumed was powerless to fight back. All I'd done was remove my protection from him. The rest was just consequences catching up. 6 months after Thanksgiving, I sat in my attorney's office reviewing the final paperwork. Victoria's divorce was complete. Derek had been ordered to pay child support but had no steady income to garnish. The hidden assets had been recovered and split according to state law. Victoria kept the house. Turned out the down payment had come from her savings account, not Derek's secret funds. Benjamin had finished his first real estate analysis under my guidance. His work was thorough, conservative, and showed genuine understanding of market fundamentals. "Dad," Victoria said, joining me at Margaret's office, "I need to ask you something." "Go ahead. The will, the charitable donations, is that really what you want?" I looked at my daughter carefully. "What do you think I should want?" I think you should do whatever makes you feel respected." "And what would make me feel respected?" Victoria considered this. "An apology, a real one, and proof that we've learned from this." "What kind of proof?" "Benjamin's working with you now, learning your business. I'm asking for your advice about my finances instead of letting someone else control them." Victoria paused. "And I divorced Derek." "You divorced Derek because he was financially abusing you," I pointed out, "not because of me." "Both things can be true." I smiled slightly. "Yes, they can." Victoria looked at Margaret. "Is the will changeable?" "Of course," Margaret said. "Mr. Hayes can modify his estate planning anytime he chooses." "Dad, what would it take? For you to reconsider?" I looked at both of them thoughtfully. "Victoria, for 6 months, Derek convinced you I was incompetent. You never asked me directly about my situation. You never questioned his assumptions. You were willing to sign papers, giving him control over my life." Victoria nodded, accepting the criticism. "But when you discovered Derek was lying to you, you filed for divorce within a week." "Yes. And when you found out about the hidden assets, you fought for your rights." "Yes. So you're capable of standing up for yourself when you have enough information." Victoria understood where this was going. "The problem wasn't that Derek lied to me," she said slowly. "The problem was that I didn't verify his claims about you." "Exactly. I trusted him instead of talking to you." "Yes." Victoria looked down at her hands. "Dad, I'm sorry. I should have asked you directly about your finances. I should have questioned Derek when he started talking about nursing homes and power of attorney. And I should have stood up for you when Derek was being disrespectful. Even if I thought you needed help, that didn't justify letting him treat you badly." "Anything else?" "I should have trusted that you could take care of yourself. You'd been doing it for 72 years. I nodded approvingly. "That's a real apology, Victoria." "Does that mean—" "It means I'll consider modifying the will." Victoria's face lit up. "But there are conditions." Her expression became serious again. "First, no one makes financial decisions for me without my explicit written consent." "Agreed." "Second, no one discusses my finances with other people unless I'm present." "Agreed." "Third, if anyone suggests I'm incompetent again, they're out permanently." "Understood." "And fourth," I said, "Derek gets nothing, ever. From me, from my estate, from any trust or gift. Nothing." Victoria nodded without hesitation. "Derek made his choice." "Yes, he did." Margaret was already drafting notes. "Modified estate planning with conditions?" 50% to children, 50% to charity, I said, with detailed competency protections. "I'll have new documents ready by Friday." As we left Margaret's office, Victoria walked quietly beside me. "Dad?" "Yes?" "Why did you let Derek humiliate you for so long? Why didn't you stop it earlier?" I considered her question. "Victoria, I needed to know who Derek really was, and who you really were, and who Benjamin really was." "What do you mean?" "I needed to know if my family would respect me when they thought I was powerless, if you'd defend me when you thought I needed help." Victoria winced. "And I needed to know if Derek would control my life when he thought he could get away with it." "Now you know," Victoria said quietly. "Yes, now I know." We reached our cars. "Dad, what happens now?" "Now you rebuild your life. Benjamin learns the business. Derek faces the consequences of his choices. And us, our family? Our family continues, with new boundaries and better understanding." Victoria hugged me carefully. "Thank you for giving us another chance." "Thank you for earning it." As I drove home in my 1987 Ford F-150, I reflected on the lessons learned. Derek had assumed that wealth meant showing off, that respect came from intimidation, that family meant control. He'd been wrong about everything. Real wealth whispers. Real power protects. Real family respects. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous to cross. If you're watching this, remember, never underestimate someone just because they choose to live modestly. You never know who might own the building you're standing in.